Alright, so welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion of business history. So there's kind of an underlying theme when it comes to business history. Let's move that up a little bit. And the first part is there's this belief that businesses place profit above people, above ethics, and other kinds of values like we discussed in Plato's theory of forms. And because of that, people feel kind of a strain that's caused by business. However, I might argue that this is really more of a struggle of haves and have-nots. Many of your critics of business are people that have in some way been wronged by a business. The people that don't criticize business are the ones who are beneficiaries of the capitalist system. So I think it's probably more of a question of haves or have-nots versus whether businesses are committing any sort of wrong or not per se. So the first era that we're going to talk about when it comes to business history is, of course, the ancient world. Ancient or classical world. Thinking of particularly the Greeks and Romans. Now, believe it or not, ancient Greece and Rome were basically composed of agrarian societies. I mean, these were an agrarian society, by the way. That's a society with a largely agricultural economy. Let me write that up there. So most of the people in ancient Rome and ancient Greece were farmers. There was some trade, there was some arts, there was some culture, but these magnificent civilizations were basically built on the backs of farmers. Now, of course, the philosophers from ancient Greece and Rome believed that profit-seeking was something that was kind of a bad thing. You know, what you should really look for is kind of excess or virtue. That's what the philosophers said. I can guarantee that the emperors and the wealthy of Rome and Greece didn't see it that way. Okay, they were all about almost a hedonistic view of life that actually glorified the pursuit of wealth. So you have the philosophers that believe one thing, and then you have the wealthy of society that believe something very different. People like Plato, frequently say that everyone has this appetite that can never be fully satisfied. But if you pursue virtue, if you try to understand forms of the abstract, you kind of suppress these. Again, when you look at the lives of some of these individuals that come up with these anti-materialistic sentiments, a lot of times it has to do with the fact that they don't have a high quality of life. If you don't have any sort of means to pursue wealth, you're more likely to come up with philosophies and ideas that try to justify your existence or the way you live. Again, philosophers versus merchants and the upper class of society had very different viewpoints. Aristotle, again, thought that, sometimes actually, some pursuit of wealth is good, especially if you're trading for subsistence. Now, one individual that I think is particularly significant is Marcus Aurelius. And he actually, in his book Meditations, believed that a rich person possessed inner peace instead of capital or property. Now that's significant. Marcus Aurelius wasn't just a philosopher, he was also an emperor of Rome. Now you think about an emperor of Rome, these are people who are generally seen to have lived almost a hedonistic lifestyle. To the Romans, the emperor was a god, so anything that they wanted was right there at their fingertips for them. Slaves, food, alcohol, entertainment, travel, anything they wanted, it was just right there. All they had to do was name it and it came to them. Now Marcus Aurelius gave all that up and lived as a general on the front fighting against the early Germanic tribes. So he gave up the wealth and the privilege and the comforts of being an emperor to go and slosh around in the mud and the rain on campaign his whole life. So the fact that he said that, I think, is actually quite significant. However, I would say he's more of an outlier of Roman emperors than being the norm. Okay, so now we'll start looking at the medieval world. Okay. Now, the medieval world, generally speaking, the early Catholic Church, or the early Christian Church, it was called at the time, kind of frowned on profit seeking. And they also had an interesting idea that there was a fixed amount of wealth in the world. There was a fixed pie. And just because if you had extra wealth, then that meant in some way you were depriving wealth from someone else. The amount of wealth was fixed. It didn't change. And there were two kinds of prices that you had. You had the just price. You had a market price. So we all know what a market price is because we've all taken economics. That's that price that comes from that intersection of supply and demand. Okay. Now the just price basically says that there's a moderation of profit. So the total price is whatever you put for goods and materials plus some sort of a fair determination for what the cost of labor should be. Just price was usually determined by guilds. So if you made a table in such a way, however long you worked, that was what you paid a master carpenter or a journeyman carpenter or whatever it was. And that was a price that was fixed. It didn't matter whether that was overpriced or underpriced. That was just the price that was offered. Now we still see things like just price even in contemporary society. I don't know if anybody likes flea markets, but I know that I do. And you go to the flea market and the guy says, oh, that mug is $15. And you say, oh, I think I'll give, $1 for it. And then he says, $12. And I say $3. And then, we start getting around $8. And he says, hey, man, I got to eat too. And, like a sucker, I always overpay because I feel bad that the guy gives me some story about he's got to eat too. So that's kind of an example of just price in everyday practice. Another idea that exists in the medieval world was usury. And usury is the practice of lending money for interest. So if you were a Christian in Europe, actually you could not loan money for interest. Now, there are all sorts of other ways for loaning money that existed, like indentured servitude, selling people into slavery, all sorts of bizarre trading mechanisms that are a little bit beyond the scope of this course, but interest wasn't allowed. Now, there was one group of people in Europe that did loan money for interest, and that was the Jews. Okay? Jews were allowed to loan money for interest because they were not Christians. Because of that, it led to a great deal of persecution. Imagine, for example, if you loan money to the bank, and the bank tries to collect. You can call them a name, or you could even kill them. Probably there wouldn't be a lot of investigations or whatnot. So that might lead you to kind of persecute a minority group if they're the only ones loaning out money at an interest rate to you. So this is actually quite an unfortunate episode in medieval history. Now, towards the end of the Middle Ages, the money supply and economic activity kind of start to expand, and interest-bearing loans kind of start to take place. So this wraps up the first two periods of business history. We're going to take a stop here, and then we'll shift to the modern world in our next video.